memories of that school.
This meeting is being recorded.
Except, oh, you want me to do something? Okay. I lost my cursor.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. I remember the squabbles with Konstantinos. That's one thing I remember. And he was having some trouble with the student, trying to get the students to do what he wanted, and I was to some extent trying to defend the students against Konstantinos. That's one thing I remember. And of course, what I do remember is that physics in these days was much more enjoyable than today, because there were actually results rather than just limits and all kinds of speculations, which is how it's developed in the last 10 years or so. So it suited my style much better to be closer to some actual phenomenology rather than lots of theoretical speculations. So in subsequent years, I made many visits to Corfu, to the school, and it was held in many different places, and latterly I was not quite so happy when I went up the hill. I was happier when I was in more central to the town places. And I'm not sure I have much more to say, actually.
Your night.
I didn't catch that. Oh, thank you.
Yes. Professor Lee, can you hear us?
Thank you very much. Maybe I first try to share what I prepared. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for asking me to say a few words to the George Festival and to George. I met George in the 90s. I'm not completely sure. First, maybe we met with Julius West Group in Munich, or soon later, or the other way around. He visited me at Schrödinger Institute in Vienna, which we started more than 30 years ago. So George with Corfu is much ahead of me. Now, I recognized, looking to the internet immediately, that we have to congratulate George for a lot of things which I can phrase only in inequalities. He started more than 40 years Corfu. He has more than 200 publications. So a fixed number is not very strict, rigorous, because in a few weeks it's enhanced, it's increasing immediately. He has more than 4,500 citations. He has many co-workers, I didn't count. He had many affiliations, and in the morning I followed a few talks, and they were mentioned, so very impressive. He has many research projects which you can read in the internet. Now, what I did is then to check the keywords in the publication, starting with quark models, alternative models to standard model, etc., etc. And it was very nice reviewed, so to say, by Hans-Peter Niels and by Holdig in the morning session. So it's not me that I should go into details. I just have a look to the phrases like dimensional reduction, coset space construction, finite unified theories, a subject which George worked over 30 years, and it has mentioned in the morning session too, reduction of couplings. So the idea of Zimmermann to reduce the number of coupling constants in the models by using certain restrictions like finiteness, for instance. And he evaluated really the mass of top quark, which is not far away from what has been measured, and also of the Higgs mass, by the way. So SUSY breaking mechanisms, etc. Now, at the end of the century, he turned slowly to non-commutativity, to non-commutative geometry, as we heard from Harald, Steinacker, and from Meyer. But the subject, so to say, was the headings are increased, and non-commutative starts everywhere, like Big Bang singularity, like fuzzy extra dimensions, so non-commutative extra dimensions, as we heard details. Fuzzy coset construction, how to formulate the fermions, etc., Einstein-Young-Mills, and so on, and everywhere, and non-commutative geometry. So slowly, everything was prepared for something which I would say is a spirit, I will come next to it, spirit of George work in the past and for the future. Now, as it was mentioned, a book by Siebold consists more or less half of contributions by George. It's called Reduction of Couplings and its Application to Particle Physics, edited in 2014. And as it was mentioned, so after Higgs discovery, finite unified theory, so the great, how to say, goal to have a model which is well-defined, which is finite, so to say. That's a great step. Hopefully, he is right in the sense it's also true in nature. Now, so to summarize the spirit, as I recognized from talks of George and also from the headings, it's that the main question is to merge quantum field theory and GR. Of course, we are aware of the many problems on both sides. So I phrased a few of the difficulties of the divergences Lambda goes, the divergent perturbation expansion, and the triviality problem. I make a remark in a few seconds more. So, but how to add GR? And as I said in George's work, slowly it entered to really merge, unifying. It was emphasized in the morning to unification, finiteness too, of course. That would be the goal. The project to which George seemed to arrive is merge GR and quantum field theories through non-commutative geometry. What else? Now, you may allow me my own remarks concerning the subject, because we are on the same track since years, and I interacted, of course, with George quite a number of times at various places. But it's much more simplified in the sense I'm away from phenomenology, so it's only the principal question of constructing one model. And a small remark which George might like is the deformed 5 to the 4th model, which at first glance is non-renormalizable, became renormalizable, as George knows, and we discussed several times, by adding one more relevant operator to the interaction. And then there is no lambda ghost, so lambda ghost is gone. It's non-perturbative renormalizable. And much more recently, we proved that the model is non-trivial. That is to say, this triviality problem is overcome. That's due to the fact that the model is non-local, and therefore there is a long-range interaction. And this long-range interaction, so to say, not only next to nearest neighbors, next to nearest neighbors, but everybody is interacting with everybody. It's decaying. I mean, the interaction, if you go far away, but it's slowly decaying, and that makes a model non-trivial. So George might be interested in the details once I hope we can interact again. Now, to see how George arrived at it, so you have seen the key words, but in one of the almost last publication, it's called Intertwining Non-Commutativity with Gravity and Particle Physics. So a goal which I like, of course, and many people like nowadays. That would be the goal. These are the collaborators of this publication. It's not the last one, as I said. In a couple of weeks, comes in the next, etc. And to summarize, in the words of George and collaborators from the paper, it's written also under the framework of non-commutativity. We examine the possibility of unifying the two fields, gravity and particle physics, in a single configuration. Good luck, George, for this entertainment. It's really a very good track. George has many collaborators, so I listed from the net just collaborators and a number of papers written together, so you see, and many others which I didn't include. So to summarize, let's thank George, Evcharisto, George, do more than 40 years Corfu, many research projects, good health for the next coming years to realize, as I said, this great goal to fuse the two pillars on which our fundamental physics rests. Enjoy the GeorgeFest, and let's extend our long friendship, George. Thank you very much. Evcharisto.
Thank you very much, Professor Grosse. Professor Luest, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me as well?
Yes.
Good. George, can you also hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. I also like to share the screen, please. I think before Harald has to unlock his presentation.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, here it is. Video beenden. Yeah, sorry. And also stumm.
I think it's not yet done, Harald. Okay. I think I can do it. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes.
Okay, no, then I will start. So it's a pleasure for me to give this short contribution. In fact, dear George, dear all, I like to make basically a few personal remarks, which really also go to my heart and I like to convey to you. Actually, George, we know each other for, I think, roughly 40 years now. We met in Munich, I think it was the year 1993 when I was a PhD student. And I think it's fair to say that at that time, you were very crucial to my career. Basically, you were acting as my second PhD advisor. Maybe I should even better say you were acting as my first PhD advisor. And we started at that time collaboration and also a friendship which really lasts till now, and I'm sure it will last for many more years. I will comment a little bit more on the work we did together in a moment, but as I said, you were visiting Munich at that time, and I was visiting also your home. I think you worked at CERN in Geneva at that time, and you invited me to Geneva. And kindly enough, you were also inviting me to your place. I was staying in your place in Meran, where I also learned Ritzer, whom I met there for the first time. And we also got a friend there. And moreover, I also met the young baby Spiros there in Geneva. And it's, of course, also a pleasure to basically, in some way or other, always also kept the contact to Spiros, your son. You stayed also several times in our place in Munich, I think, and therefore you also learned my wife, Ursula, and I should convey also the best regards from Uschi for this day to you here. So we wrote some papers together, which I will show also in a moment. But also very important to me, you introduced me also to several other colleagues from Greece. I met, for example, already at the time, Lefteris Papadonopoulos. But you introduced me also to other colleagues at CERN when I was visiting CERN. I think most notably Kostas Kounas already at the time. And I remember the situation. So we had some question about grand unification and supersymmetry. So you told me there's an expert at CERN in supersymmetry and supergravity. We should ask him. So we went to the office of Kostas. It was, as usual, full of cigarette smoke, but Kostas immediately, I think, could answer all our questions. Later on, I met many other people from Greece, which I also get friend with, like in particular Kostas Bachas, Yanis Bakas, Elias Kiritsis, and many others. So I think also it's due to you that in a way I really got accustomed with the Greek people and their way of life, which I of course appreciate a lot. Actually, I would say that Greece now became, yeah, one can say my second or third home. It's really one of the favorite countries for me, and this is also absolutely because of you. Talking about Greece, the most beloved place for me in Greece is of course Corfu, where I stayed now over many years. I think I could not count correctly how many times I was in Corfu. It must have been 30 times or more. And clearly I admire a lot how you have built up the conference center in Corfu. It is a fantastic place. It is one of the best meeting places for physicists in the world. And I always like to be here. Actually, the week in September in Corfu is one of the highlights always of the year. It's always very nice to be there, of course, to meet you there, to meet many other good colleagues and friends there. As I said, over the years, we work closely together. We see each other, I think, basically several times a year. You have been visiting then also our group in Berlin and later in Munich. And I like to show now just a very few papers which we did together, which count a lot to me. So let's see whether this works. So the first, let's see. Yeah, the first paper which we wrote together is about dynamical fermion mass generation hierarchy. That was a very nice scheme, which was basically introduced by George. It goes back to previous papers by George. And the main observation is there that in QCD, there are not only representations which form color triplets, but also higher representations, and they can form condensates, and they then dynamically break the electroweak symmetry. And that, I think, is a very nice mechanism, which I don't know whether it's completely excluded today, most likely, but at that time, it was a very nice alternative also to Technicolor, and we worked on several aspects of this mechanism. Then another paper which was really very important for me also. I think it was mentioned already that George also has very great contributions to dimensional reduction. This started also with some work of George and Peter Forgacs, and I don't know whether Peter will also say something. So I also met Peter there. I was introduced to Peter by George, and we wrote this paper about dimensional reduction of higher dimensional gauge theories over coset spaces. And this paper was, in fact, for me, really important. I learned various techniques there, and this was basically also the entrance for me into string theory, one can say, and I used it also in my subsequent work, which I started as a postdoc in Caltech. Then 2 or 3 years passed, and I came back to Munich, and I also worked there and met Stefan Theisen. So we wrote this particular paper together with Stefan Theisen and George. It is about 4-dimensional heterotic string constructions. And in this paper, we used techniques of conformal field theory to compute the amplitudes of these 4-dimensional strings and compared them also with the low energy effective action. And I think this was one of the first papers where the low energy effective field theory for 4-dimensional strings was computed from string amplitudes. Then again, a few years passed, and we go to the year 2002 in Berlin, where we again worked together. And in fact, we were analyzing non-Kähler string backgrounds, so string compactifications basically on non-Calabi-Yau, non-Ricci flat manifolds. And we related this to the so-called torsion classes. I think this paper received very high recognition. I think it's cited, if I remember correctly, more than 300 times. And we had a very good collaboration also on this subject. I think one of your students, Manu Seles, was also part of the collaboration. Finally, I like to mention a very recent paper. It's with Anne-Maria Hell. I think she is also around. She is a very promising now young postdoc, former student in Munich of Slava Mukhanov, and it's a pleasure to work also together with Anna-Maria and George. And in this paper, which appeared just in August, we analyzed the ghost problem of conformal gravity, of higher, of quadratic gravity, and ways how to get rid of the ghosts, in particular for the zither background. So I think it's also an interesting and relevant problem. So before I close, I like to show you and the others, to the other participants, some pictures. I think mainly from Corfu, but also from the outside. And I think this will then close my presentation. So let me see. The screen is. So this is a picture. I think it's from the year 2011, together with Graham Ross. I think during the Greek night, where you can see George. It's a little bit not very well focused, but never mind. Oops, I cannot. Yeah, here's another paper with famous scientist Ludwig Fadeev, where George and Ludwig are dancing Sirtaki, also from the year 2011, and this also gives evidence. It gives clear evidence and proves that George is also a Greek dancer. I could have shown you also some movies even, but I refrain from doing this because I'm not sure whether they will eventually run and maybe even cost a lot of time. So this is with Ludwig Fadeev from St. Petersburg. Again, a dancing picture. This is the Greek night on the island, and I think the other person is the owner of the taverna at the time, and we had really very fantastic nights, and I share very nice memories, of course, with all these Greek evenings in Corfu. Here the speaker before with Harald, so must have been also at one of the Greek evenings, and according to my records, this picture was taken in the year 2013. Well, another picture from 2013 with Leonardo Castellani and some other people. I think this is in the bar in the restaurant of the Corfu Palace Hotel in the peninsula. What I also want to say, one sees that George is always in very good shape, and actually for me, almost he didn't change very much. I remember him from the early days of 40 years ago like that, and in a way, George, you are looking still always the same and very energetic. So here in 2015, this is in Portugal. There was a conference organized by Harald Fritsch at the coast, and you can also see George there waving his arm or his hand. This is now in 2016 in Munich, where you were actually greeting me for my 60th birthday. And this also is from the same event and shows also, I think, our close friendship. 2018, I think must have been again in Corfu. As one can see, this is the restaurant Egli, you see from the umbrella. And it's also one of my favorite places, of course, on the island. Here is another great friend, which I have mentioned before, Marius Petropoulos, also a frequent participant and visitor in Corfu. I think this must have been in the Taverna uphill. And a picture from last year with the two of us together. And finally also with a picture with Jan, the organizer or co-organizer of the GeorgeFest. So I think this closes my short contribution. George, I really like to thank you for your constant and deep friendship, and also for the support of my career. Actually, almost from the beginning, we were calling us the best friends, or my best friend, and I think this really is true. So thank you very much, George.
Thank you very much. Very nice words. In the way, can you hear us? Probably we could proceed with Professor Forgacs. Professor Forgacs, can you hear us?
Yes, sorry. It was a bit distorted. Okay. So let me start. Maybe video works. Yes, fantastic. May I share my screen as well?
Share the screen.
Is it all right?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, greetings to George. And of course, I am very happy to say a few words on him, although so many people just before me, Dieter, by the way, best regards to you, Dieter, also. It's a long time since we haven't seen each other. So this is really celebrating excellence, I believe. And also it's a tribute to a dear friend, Big George Zoupanos, as he was called when we were together in England, I believe in Southampton. So I will just say a few words. I think most of the things people have told before me. Well, today is the day, well, most remarkable achievement of George is really celebrated. And I would like to say that George is really much more than just a distinguished scientist. He's distinguished, but it's much more. Well, he's an exceptional teacher, I believe. There are so many very good students of him who became great scientists. And he is, but I would really say, a true visionary. I think he almost single-handedly managed to create this Corfu school. And which goes together with that, in George, although this is also exceptional, that he's an exceptional organizer. So a visionary and an organizer. And lastly, but maybe it's most important, apart from physics, that he's a great friend to many of us. Now, this is a picture which some people already shown, typical of George before the blackboard. So I met George a long time ago. It was, I believe, in '83. So it's kind of, it's really a long time. And as already Dieter even put a paper on the subject, we started to work on dimensional reduction of higher dimensional gauge series together. And then continued working with him over the years, but in many places. Well, I mean, Munich, maybe that was the most important place. I also went quite a few times. And George, I think he's kind of invited permanent staff or something. Then in Athens, Corfu, Paris, Southampton, and still many places. Now, just a few words on this coset space dimensional reduction. We mentioned there was reduction of couplings, and there are reduction of dimensions, which George is still working on. The main point, from the physical point of view, for those who are not that familiar with that, the gauge and scalar sectors are unified in a pure gauge theory in a higher dimensions, and the scalar sector is completely predicted. Now, moreover, there are chiral fermions, and this scheme, well, it maybe goes back to Kaluza or Kałuża, I think in Polish, and Klein, but in fact, this has been really pushed by, I must say, Joel Scherk at the time when he realized that string theories could be reinterpreted maybe as fundamental theories. And that's the way, at least, I got into this subject at the time. Well, there were problems originally to get chiral fermions, which have been solved. But somehow these schemes in the early 80s seemed to be very speculative. Even John Schwartz, who also, with whom I spent some time in Paris, well, was really a bit working on other things than strings. He said, well, it's getting too formal, too far away from physics. So that was kind of an esoteric framework at that time, dimensional reduction. But George really insisted that, okay, this is an interesting scheme, and one should really get some physics from it. And he was pushing it very hard. And I think he managed, and he's still doing. He involved the whole generation of students and collaborators to this subject. And then he went on and extended totally the scope of the subject. Of course, there have been many developments. Well, one of the great father of this is Dieter Luest. Well, it's in strings, but now it has been extended to non-commutativity, gravity, as Harald was saying, very interesting remarks on that. In fact, if I may say, George really created the Zoupanos coup on dimensional reduction. So I just would like to finish to say that his passion, dedication, leadership has served really as a guiding light for all of us. So thanks to you, George. Thank you a lot for all your exceptional contribution and for your friendship.
Thank you very much, Professor Forgacs. And I think we may proceed with Professor Gilas. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Perfect.
Can I share?
Yes, yes.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, yes, perfect.
Yes, so first of all, thank you very much for this honor to say a couple of words about George, who played a very important role in my career that we already heard from many other people before. I'm probably one of the youngest of these persons, so I will mostly concentrate on some personal recollections, since scientifically, even if I did encounter George a lot of times and a lot of discussions, we never had a paper together. So, so first of all, again, many other people will say more than me than on the scientific contributions of George. But just to mention a little bit, George had many contributions to theoretical physics, like finite quantum field theories, reduction of couplings, non-commutative geometry, fuzzy extra dimensions, coset reductions, predictions of the Higgs mass. We had many discussions on various occasions, supersymmetry, extra dimensions, string theory, of course, masses of elementary particles. I remember very well the very, very nice predictions of George about the top mass before it was discovered, based mostly on the reduction of couplings, a prediction of the Higgs mass, very early prediction of the Higgs mass. So these were we always had a lot of discussions. So as I said, I mostly try to remember some personal things, because for me, George and Corfu especially was something very, very important at the beginning of my career. So I first encountered George probably around 1991 when I was a PhD student in Marseille, with Pierre Vinetruy, and George was coming very often discussing with various people, in particular John Mador. And I remember he was bringing often some of his students, and I remember Alex Kehagias at that time, who was a young PhD student. I met George in various places. Here are just some of the places we met, but probably many, many more. I remember spending weeks together in Munich, in bars, in various other places, Morio, I remember CERN, a lot of times. But what I really wanted to insist is Corfu, which is really in some sense, the child of George, is probably the place which I visited most for conferences and workshops. This was my first conference where I gave a talk. It was 1992. It was the first and the only time, as far as I remember, I performed, I played the piano at the banquet, and I could say a lot of things about various Corfu, but I will just, concerning this first conference, I remember that at this concert, George and Kostas Kounas did, at some point I started playing Zorba the Greek, and I remember they started dancing. I don't know who paid the damage because there were plates which were broken. And also Luis Ibanez, I remember, who was lead vocal on some of the songs we played at that time. It was the only time I did perform at the conference. Now, as I said, Corfu was my first participation to an international school, my first talk. And what is very special to me, again, I insist most on these personal things, because again, many others insist more on the physics part. We spent many, many evenings and nights together in Faliraki. Some of the people which already talked before were also there, very often until 2 in the morning, even more, with lectures and seminars to follow the next morning. And to me, it was a unique place to experience this. I also have a long story about how George teach me to negotiate with Greek taxes, but it would be too long to explain why it was so important for me. Corfu was the opportunity to meet a lot of great physicists, to meet and a lot of people who become later friends. I also had the pleasure and the honor to co-organizing with George some of the Corfus and some of the what was called Humboldt College more recently, but also in the old days I helped a little bit, George a little bit. It was emphasized, but I'd like to emphasize again that George, in addition to being a really incredible organizer for this Corfu school, he also created a physics school in Athens. He had many excellent students, and I do have physics publication with 2 of his. One of them was Alex Kehagias, was directly his PhD student. And then the student of Alex Kehagias was his grandson somehow of George, which was Fotis Kalakos. So I do have a collaboration with his school. To me, the most important is something which I find incredible, the devotion and the work that George put in to keep alive the Corfu school. It's in some sense unique, and the only comparable case I know is probably Jean Tantan Van with the school he created, with the conference place he created in Queen and Vietnam. So other people will say, but what George did really for Corfu to keep it alive, to bring the money, to move it from this Union Parliament at the beginning to more repo was just incredible, and it's still going on. And something again personal, due to George warm hospitality, unique environment created in Corfu. Corfu is probably maybe the unique professional place. When I go, I really feel home. I don't feel just like going to conference, but like being home. So to me, Corfu and George are one of the same things. So Corfu would never have existed without George. So just to finish, thank you for everything you did for Corfu, George. For me in particular, giving me the opportunity to give again at my first international talk in particular, and for your friendship that all the meetings we had over the years, and I hope we continue to have. Happy birthday and see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for your talk. Professor Barbieri, can you hear us? So probably we should go to Professor Chatzistavrakidis.
Did you call me Barbieri? Is that right? No.
Yes. So yeah, Professor Athanasios, let's wait for it. So Professor Barbieri, the floor is yours.
I'm sorry, I hear very badly. Am I supposed to talk?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me share the screen if I can. Do you see me? Do you see me?
Yes.
Can I go on?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, at least as for everybody else, I am very glad to say a few words in this occasion about George. You see, myself, I have neither been a collaborator of George, nor I have been, I must say, to my fault, at the conference in the last 10 years. In fact, I guess that my last participation to Corfu was in 2018, as I realized from the picture that I saw, somebody showed a little bit earlier with George and Graham Ross and his wife. So let not me talk of physics, okay? I cannot compete with all the other people that have been talking of physics and of physics related to George. But let me only essentially talk of a little episode about the school for a reason that you will, I hope, understand. In probably my first occasion in Corfu, which goes back to God knows when, George sort of decided to bring me, perhaps even with Guido Torelli, I'm not sure of that, but I think that was likely to be the case, to see an authority of the island, a mayor or whatever. I don't remember exactly. Maybe George remember that. With the idea of speaking of the importance of creating a school and an institute in the location that we all know very well. Now, I don't know how effective it was, that visit. I do know that the institute has grown, and people that have visited recently tell me that the buildings are in much better shape than 20 years ago or so. So maybe something has happened. But the reason for me to bring up this little episode is basically the following. You see, at some point, I thought, in fact, Emilian mentioned right now Trantamvan. Well, in that occasion, I brought up I remember very well, the example of Erice, of the Majorana Center, Ettore Majorana Center, and of course, with saying that that was a great example of how creating an institute in a town, in an island like Sicily, could have been very important in many respects for the culture and also for increasing the visits to the place and so on and so forth, and not only that. Now, why do I bring up this little episode? Well, you see, I have seen myself, Antonino Zichichi, in 2018 at the Heritage School for the last time. And now, at that time, Antonino Zichichi was 90, and I guarantee you that I have seen Antonino dancing with the student girls during several evenings. So the reason for me to quote that example is that I am sure that George, whom I understand is around 70, right? Or perhaps slightly more than 70, but so he has still 20 more years to go to dance, perhaps not with girls, but with colleagues in Sirtaki and whatever, and keep going with this excellent institute that, as everybody has said, is a real example for all the European community. Thanks again, George. I wish you that you will be able to continue for at least another 20 years. Okay, thanks. That's all.
Thank you very much, Professor Barbieri. So now we can proceed with Professor Chatzistavrakidis.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hello everybody, and hello Yorgo. Greetings from Zagreb, and it's great to be here with you today, even remotely. And I would like to extend my thanks to all the previous speakers for sharing their memories and their recollections about the life and the achievements of George. It's great to honor George today as a scientist, as the heart and the soul of Corfu, of course, but also as a teacher, and in my case, as a supervisor, and as a great friend, because all of us have, I'm sure, wonderful memories from spending time with George. So there are many stories to tell, of course, and this is too little time. So today I will share, like many other previous speakers, only very few of my personal recollections. And you can read the rest in my upcoming book, The Life and Times of George Zoupanos. So this is meant to be a joke, but what we learned today is that maybe I should take a sabbatical and write this book. Anyway, I met George in 2003 as an undergrad student in a quantum mechanics course, and I was very soon impressed by him as a teacher and as a figure. So I decided to join his group in 2005 for an undergraduate diploma thesis, and I was very lucky because 2005 was a Corfu year. Perhaps you remember that, unlike now, Corfu was not an annual event. The previous one was in 2001 and then in 2005. So in 2005, as an undergraduate student, I appeared in Corfu. And I have this beautiful photo with Professor Sutherland that we heard earlier, who was George's supervisor. So these are essentially 3 generations here. So, of course, 2005 is quite late for most of you, but like in the first Corfu event, I was actually unborn. Anyway, let me go a little bit to the physics. So I guess that, as mentioned many times, and as I've heard many times from George, what he's mostly proud of is his work on the masses of elementary particles. And of course, we have the story about the top mass that we heard before, which he had models that predicted the top mass way before its discovery. And something similar repeated many years later with the Higgs mass. In both cases, he had given a very good value for the masses of these two particles many years ahead of discovery. And of course, one thing that what this tells us is that George has really elite physical intuition, and I can attest to that. So at the time, though, that I joined his group, I was not involved in this kind of project. George always had a big love for symmetries and for unification, and in particular, as we heard before, for extra dimensions. And then as a student of George, one of the initiation things you had to do was to go through and read and learn very, very well his physics reports on cosset space dimension reduction. And of course, this is a physics report that was written in the early 90s, summarizing work that was done, as mentioned also by Dieter, Luest before, in the 80s and in the early 90s. But at the time, in the mid-2000s, the topic had resurfaced largely because of the interest of the renewal of interest in flux compactifications and the moduli stabilization problem. So I believe we did some nice work with George on cosset spaces, and George really likes cosset spaces. And of course, he has a very good sense of what he likes and not. So apart from that, at this time, George was very enthusiastic about something that he hadn't worked long in the past, but he had, as mentioned earlier by Harald Grosse and by Maja Buric, he had come to be very interested in, and this is non-commutative geometry, and in particular, fuzzy extra dimensions, in the form again of cosset spaces, essentially. So bridging again ideas that he was familiar with new ideas that he was learning at the time. And this topic was very much promoted during the visits that we had in Athens from Maja Buric and by our dear beloved friend, the late John Mador. But George was always focused on the physics, and in particular, he was always trying to find a way to relate things to the real world and to particle physics. In particular, you would always hear George talking about chiral fermions. So in general, George is, I think, a bridge builder of ideas, and this is something that we all learned from him, how to combine seemingly disparate ideas and come up with new models. And of course, George really likes chiral fermions, I should emphasize. Now, of course, the fact that George is so successful is not only because of the previous qualities I mentioned, but also because George is a real hard worker. He's a really dedicated person and a motivator, and he's really working long hours. So I remember as a PhD student that since I didn't want to leave before my supervisor from the office, I often had to stay until 10, 11 o'clock in the night or midnight until I can leave and go have dinner, because George was staying very, very long hours in the office. But also, apart from working, as you all surely know, George is a man who knows how to enjoy life and to share. We heard a lot about this also before. George is a very generous man. So let me share a few photos with him. So I remember some time ago in CERN, where we met with George's wife, Ritza, and with our colleague, Pascal Anagnostopoulos, and we had a guitar. And George, of course, likes very, very much to sing, as you all know. Well, I have a photo also where George holds the guitar. I don't know if he's playing the guitar. I cannot recall that. But you also know that George comes from Corfu, and what's more, he comes from the village of Skriperot, and I'm sure you've heard from him about how proud he is for the Philharmonic Orchestra of Skriperot. So I believe that all Corfu people got it with music one way or another, and certainly George does too. Now, George also likes driving. I have this nice photo from Munich in this old car. George, I think you remember this old car. We had a lot of discussions about chiral fermions there, and we had some very nice excursion. Well, I have a photo of this other car of yours also, which came later, which has this interesting plate with GZ 1950. But in any case, with George, it was always nice to go on excursions. I remember a lot of occasions we had to go around Bavaria, around Munich, and close to Barischel many times. This, I believe, is in the Lake Tegernsee near Munich. Or go for some light dinner. George certainly takes you to nice places to have foods and drinks. Or as Maya mentioned, you can also join George to a demonstration. So actually, Maya, here you are, demonstrated with George. Okay, so that's all from me. And I would like to extend my thanks to George. George, thank you for everything you have done and you are doing for science and for scientists and for the people of science. And I hope that you will have many opportunities to do more in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Athanasios, for your talk. We could proceed with Professor Kazakov. Can you hear us? Kazakov, are you there? Okay. Konstantinos Anagnostopoulos, are you there? George Theisen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Very good. Very good. So,
can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I don't have any slides prepared, and but I was very glad when I was asked to contribute to this special event in honor of George. Now, being one of the later speakers, of course, there's not that much left for me to say because everything has, or many things have already been said, which highlighted and the many things that George has done as a scientist and also as a personal friend to all of us. But I want to mention one thing which Dieter Luest had already mentioned, this paper on string theory that we wrote in 1987. That's also the first time I met George in Munich when I was a postdoc. I shared an office with Dieter, and Dieter introduced me to George. And I still remember very well when I first met George. And then we started collaborating on this topic. And for me, it was the first paper on string theory. And it's still one of my favorite on the subject because I think it's still one of the ways at least perturbative string theory should be done, namely formulating it in the language of conformal field theory. And as Dieter had already mentioned, this was one of the first, if not the first paper, which used this method to derive the low energy effective action of some 4-dimensional strings. Then later, I had one more collaboration with George on the non-perturbative unification scenario, which probably most of you don't know, and I will not go into any details. We worked on this when we were both, I think I was a fellow at CERN and George was a visitor at CERN at the time. Now, unfortunately, further collaborations didn't happen, but that doesn't mean that we did not discuss physics many times because we had the occasion to meet in various places, 3 times in Corfu, but my last visit to Corfu, I think, was in 2001. So it's time to go again. And I certainly would very much like to visit the Corfu school again in the coming years. But George has been a friend of Dieter, and that led to many invitations of George to Germany. So we met several times in Munich. Also, when I spent 8 years in Munich altogether. But then George also visited the institute where I'm now in Potsdam several times. And as you all know, George is a very social person, but he's also a very serious scientist. So we had many discussions on topics of mutual interest. But George also has the gift to interest people in what he's thinking about and what he's doing at the time. So we had many discussions, and I hope we will have further discussions in the future, and I hope that we will have more occasions to meet. Now that we are both retired, it's probably not there are not so many occasions left, also because of travel funds, which are always required for these kind of meetings. But nevertheless, I hope George will continue doing good work, and I wish him all the best, and I wish myself to meet him soon again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the next speaker is Konstantinos Anagnostopoulos. So Anagnostopoulos, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Greetings from Vienna, from the Irving's Schrödinger Institute, where I'm having fun with many of George's friends who send their most affectionate greetings: Hikaru Kawai, Dinjo O'Connor, Yunishimura, Sato Tsuchiya. Many people here have been discussing about George after I told them about GeorgeFest today. I'm very sorry that I cannot join you in this festive day, which is very, very long overdue for George Zoupanos. One of the reasons I enjoyed joining the group in the National Technical University is the fact that George was there. George, as others have said before me, is a great visionary. And one of his greatest contributions in Greece is that he laid down the foundations for the largest group in high energy theory, and a very high quality group, which is a gem. Unfortunately, some of the people of the oldest generation have retired, but we hope to carry on some of his legacy there. Although we haven't really actually directly collaborated with George, I liked his physics very much, and there is some partial overlap with his work on the IKKT matrix model. But many people have said better and deeper things about his contributions in physics. I will say more about his contributions in Greece. I already mentioned the group, but he has really inspired a young generation of students with his enthusiasm and his great lectures in theoretical physics. And of course, something that started our strongest collaboration was his vision of the Corfu meetings, which immediately I realized that this was the best thing that has happened in theoretical physics in Greece. So I was very happy and never regretted to collaborate there with George, a great friend and collaborator. And I really think that he has made high energy theory in Greece much better than it was before. Thank you, George, very much. We really love you here, and we send your greetings. And some of us will join you in Corfu in a few days. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Kostas. Professor Petcov, can you hear us?
Okay, I am going to share the screen.
Yes, you can share the screen.
So, do you hear me? Do you see the screen?
Yes. Yes.
Very good. So, these are a few words of appreciation for George, whom actually I first met in 1981 at Lezouche School in theoretical physics, which was beautifully described this morning by Belen Gavel. Let me make still few comments about this school. The school lasted for 6 weeks. And of course, during this time, one could make friends with many of the participants. And the school also had fantastic speakers. I mean, Coleman, Wess, Ellis, Quick, Wick, Sagreida, Schramm, Lederman, Zinger, and Bruno Zomino attended as participants. However, we made them work. We made them give talks on certain topics. T.D. Lee, Weizkopf, and Bryce DeWitt also came along. Now, as Belen was mentioning, there were many participants in the school which later had a very successful career in theoretical particle physics, like Sally Dawson, Belen herself, Graciela Gelmini, Anna Hazenfratz, Patty McBride, John Bagger, Ronald Kleist, Louis Fayard, and of course, George. It was a fantastic school, perhaps the best I ever attended. And of course, George was a very prominent figure in that school. Now, here are the participants of the school. I don't know whether, now there is a half of Belen on the left. There is Graciela Gelmini on the left down, Anna Hazenfratz, Sally Dawson, Jonathan Bagger, and perhaps you see George, who is embracing the wooden column. I really don't know why he was doing that, but he was discussing something with Louis Fayard, who is just behind Anna Hazenfratz. Now, here is another photo where George is discussing physics with Storat. On this photo, you can see Mary Kay Gaillard, who was one of the organizers, Lederman. There is John Ellis here. And again, Louis Fayard, who is on the left-hand side, just barely seen. Now, Belen mentioned that we had parties at that school, which kept us going. And there was, Louis Fayard had a Duchevaux car, which we call the party car. And I'm telling this story because the wine for the party was provided usually by George, and I don't remember who else, probably Olivier Napoli, who were using this car to go to Chamonix and buy the necessary wine for our parties. I mean, this was, apart from the scientific activity, this was very important part of the school. Now, after the 81 school, we continued to be in touch over the years with George, meeting at CERN, workshop, conferences, and so on, and sending each us Christmas and New Year greetings. And I met him several times. This is in 1993 at the most Western European land point in Portugal. There was a meeting in Portugal, and our colleagues, Portuguese colleagues, organized this trip for us. And here is George discussing with some of the participants of that meeting. This is George in 2010 in Athens with his wife Ritza, Gustavo Branco, and myself. Now, of course, as has been discussed probably several times today, in 1981, 1982, George and his colleague Argyres, I'm not sure really who were at the origin of this idea, but I'm sure George was. They had the great idea of organizing the postgraduate summer school called Hellenic Schools of Elementary Particle Physics in Corfu. The first took place in September of 82. The school lasted 3 weeks in September and took place roughly every 3 years. Then this evolved into Corfu Summer Institute on Elementary Particle Physics. And in 2006, also the European Institute of Science and Applications was created in Corfu, which was supported in addition to the Greece institutions, also by the most prestigious universities and research centers in Europe, such as CERN, DAISY, MPI Munich, ENS Paris. Now, here is George in 92 at the Corfu Summer Institute, which was held at the Union Parliament. I attended, by the way, this school. At that and other Corfu meetings, we used the famous new currency, the Zoupanos, to pay at restaurants and bars. This was quite amazing. I mean, these were tickets with George's signature only, and this was just enough to reassure the owners. Now, I could not restrain myself of showing some pictures of Corfu. This is the central square. This is one of the beautiful corners, and this is another one. These are all familiar to all of you. Now, I'm sure that George has many funny stories about the Corfu, about things, strange things happening at the Corfu Summer Institute. Let me tell you about one which I was present. Now, in 1992, David Grosse came and gave in one of the afternoon sessions a talk on his most recent paper, which was entitled Two-Dimensional QCD as a String Theory. Now, of course, at that time, we were using transparencies in which we wrote with some special pens. Now, after the talk, or somewhat later, after the session, George took him to one of the cafes in the central part of Corfu, maybe the one that is shown here on this picture. And David went there with his transparencies in a folder. And after they finished the coffee and the drinks that they had and were about to go for dinner, David suddenly realized that his transparencies were missing. And it was very strange. And then there was a very hectic search for the transparencies of David, because he was supposed to fly next day to Rome to give the same talk in Italy. Now, at the end, we found pieces of his transparencies, but in a very terrible state. They were kind of chewed, and it was impossible to use them again. Apparently, it seems, a dog which was attracted by the smell of the transparencies took them, because probably the dog thought that this could be eaten, and then trying to eat them, the dog chewed them, but of course, the dog also realized that this cannot be eaten, and just these transparencies were really placed, I mean, all over the place in a very large area. Anyway, it was a critical situation. Luckily, the secretary of the institute made a copy of David's transparencies, which were kept in the building where we had the lectures. So George at the end had to go to her place, call her. They went back to the Union Parliament and took the copy. So at the end, David Grosse had at least this copy of his talk that he could use for the talk in Rome. I'm sure that there are many other stories of this kind that happened in Corfu. Now, from the very beginning of the summer school and later of the institute in Corfu and until today, George was the founding organizer, a major protagonist, and I would say a driving force. I myself participated with talk and lectures in 3 of the institute's programs, 92. I don't remember the year of the second one, and then in 2010. And of course, I have beautiful memories of these participations, and I wish I will be able to come back again sometime in the future. Of course, one of the most vivid memories is the human warmth with which George was taking care of all of us participants. Now, the Corfu Summer Institute, as all of you are aware, became a reference European and not only summer institute. The activities first at the Hellenic Summer School and later at the Corfu Summer Institute and those organized by ESA helped educate more than one generation of young particle physicists. Now, I do not have statistical data, but it is my guess that every active theoretical particle physicist in Europe, and if not worldwide, has attended at least once the activities of the schools and institutes in Corfu, which is quite remarkable. Now, this is the program of the 2010 activities, and this is the list of the speakers. And if you go through this list, you will realize that the leading particle theorists were all there. With George's enthusiasm, devotion, organizational and negotiation skills, the Institute survived the economic and financial turmoils, and more recently, the pandemic disruption, and is thriving today. As we can see, from the poster of the 2023 activities, which consists of 6 workshops and a school. Now, George, as was discussed here already, made significant contributions to physics. They were discussed by quite a lot by his collaborators. I'm not in position to do that. And also he was an excellent teacher, and some of his PhD students actually became leading scientists in their field of research. In addition, judging from his publication list, George keeps very strong connections, in particular with CERN, MPI Munich, University of Heidelberg, and many other institutions in Europe. And he had large number of successful scientific collaborations with many researchers in Europe, and not only. So, my friend George, congratulations on your scientific achievements and the exceptional and fruitful work that done for our community via the Corfu Summer Institute. Big thank you to you. I wish you to continue doing what you enjoy most, and to enjoy life and physics after this celebration too, in the years to come, in many years to come. All the best.
Thank you very much, Professor Petcov. We'll have another line. I think it's now time to have a short break, 5-10 minutes break, and then we'll continue with in-person talks.